Sarah Martinez's hands trembled as she sat in the Portland courthouse hallway, her nephew Tommy's baby photo clutched against her chest. The photograph was worn at the edges from being handled so many times, Tommy at 6 months old, his toothless grin capturing a moment of pure innocence. 3 years had passed since her sister died in that terrible car accident on Interstate 5. A drunk driver had crossed the median during a rainstorm, and in one catastrophic instant, Sarah's entire world had shattered. Had been 32 years old, a vibrant kindergarten teacher with dreams of traveling Europe and having more children. Instead, she was gone, and Sarah had inherited the most precious responsibility of her life, raising her infant nephew as if he were her own son. Those 3 years had been a marathon of sacrifice. Sarah had transformed her modest 2-bedroom apartment into a home filled with Tommy's laughter. She'd put him through preschool, taught him to read, bandaged his scraped knees, and held him through nightmares. She'd missed her own life, the relationships that faded because she had no time for dadding, the career advancement opportunities she'd turned down because they required overtime she couldn't afford, the simple pleasure of a night out with friends. Every dollar earned went toward Tommy's welfare, his education, his health care, his future. She'd worked double shifts at the veterinary clinic where she'd been employed for 7 years, coming home exhausted but never too tired for Tommy. Her boss, doctor, had been sympathetic and flexible, allowing her to adjust her schedule around the custody hearings and the endless paperwork. But flexibility couldn't change the fundamental truth. Sarah lived paycheck to paycheck, struggling to maintain the life they'd built together. Now at 34, Sarah faced losing him. Her brother-in-law, David, had contested her guardianship 6 months ago, filing a formal petition with the court. David was wealthy, very wealthy. He owned a chain of upscale restaurants throughout the Pacific Northwest and lived in a sprawling mansion in the West Hills neighborhood of Portland. He had the resources to hire expensive lawyers, and he deployed them like weapons. His lead attorney, Richard, was a shark in a $5,000 suit, a man whose reputation in Portland legal circles was formidable and frightening. Had built his career winning custody cases for wealthy clients, often leaving devastated parents in his wake. Sarah had watched him on the courthouse steps during preliminary hearings, confident and smiling, while she stood alone with her public defender, Johnson, a good man, intelligent and earnest, but underfunded and overwhelmed by caseload. David's argument, filtered through legal expertise, was that Tommy would benefit from his custody. The boy could attend the finest private schools, have access to world-class health care, travel internationally, and build connections that would secure his future. David claimed his intentions were pure. He wanted to honor his late wife's memory by ensuring their son had every advantage. He painted himself as the concerned uncle who cared more about the child's welfare than the biological bonds that tied Sarah to him. And there was something particularly insidious about David's campaign. He wasn't entirely dishonest. He really did love Tommy. He genuinely believed he could provide better for the boy. But his vision of better was measured in dollars and resources, not in the intangible currency of everyday love and presence. Sarah had exhausted her savings on court fees, nearly $40,000 she'd borrowed from her mother, who had her own limited means. The legal system was a ravenous beast that consumed money without mercy. Court filing fees, copying costs, expert witness fees, transportation expenses to hearings in different counties. It all added up until Sarah found herself drowning in debt she'd never recover from. She'd considered filing for bankruptcy more than once, but she couldn't afford the lawyer fees for that either. It was a cruel catch-22. The system designed to protect children financially punished those without resources, ensuring that wealth often determined outcomes. The courthouse hallway where Sarah now sat was intimidatingly sterile, beige walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of floor wax and anxiety. Other families sat scattered in uncomfortable chairs, their expressions reflecting various states of desperation and hope. A young mother held her 2 small children, whispering reassurances neither of them believed. An elderly man stared at his hands, lost in thought. Sarah recognized the universal language of people fighting for custody, for the right to keep their children in their lives. She clutched Tommy's photograph. The boy was 7 now, and he called her Mom. He had called her that naturally, without being instructed, one morning about 2 years into their life together. Sarah had been making his breakfast, his favorite scrambled eggs with cheese, and Tommy had padded into the kitchen in his Spider-Man pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mom, can I have juice?" he'd asked, and Sarah had frozen, tears forming in her eyes. She'd knelt down and held him, and that moment had crystallized everything she believed about motherhood. It wasn't about biological connection, though she loved her sister desperately. It was about showing up, day after day, choosing this child, pouring every ounce of yourself into his becoming. She was his mother in every way that mattered. Yet the court system didn't see it that way. The court saw a single woman without substantial financial resources, living in a modest apartment, working 2 jobs. The court saw a potential liability, a risk factor. David, by contrast, represented stability in the most concrete, measurable sense: money. Johnson, Sarah's public defender, appeared from the courthouse bathroom looking nervous. He was in his mid-30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he'd been fighting for Sarah's case with genuine passion for the past 4 months. But Sarah could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of too many cases, too many desperate people, too few resources. He sat beside her and whispered, "Judge is ready. We go in 5 minutes." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. Judge Harold. She'd researched him extensively, reading transcripts of his previous cases, watching videos of him presiding over hearings. He was 62 years old, appointed to the bench 20 years ago by a Democratic governor, though he had a reputation for applying the law in a conservative, straightforward manner. He was known for dismissing emotional appeals as irrelevant to legal matters. He valued documentation, evidence, and precedent. He had little patience for what he called courthouse theatrics. In the legal community, he had a nickname, the Stone. It was meant to reflect his impassive demeanor and his resistance to emotional manipulation. Sarah understood that this meant she was at a profound disadvantage. How do you prove love in a courtroom? How do you quantify the value of a mother's presence, her sacrifice, her unwavering commitment? How do you make a judge understand that Tommy needed her more than he needed a mansion, that the sound of her voice before sleep was worth more than any private school? She looked at the photograph of Tommy one final time. His innocent eyes stared back at her, full of trust. She had promised, there in that hospital room as her sister lay dying, that she would take care of Tommy. She had sworn it, and now she had to pray that a judge called the Stone would somehow understand that some things couldn't be measured in dollars, and that some bonds were stronger than any legal argument. The courthouse doors loomed before her. Sarah stood, straightened her simple navy dress, and walked toward her future, toward a moment that would determine everything. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah had imagined. She'd envisioned something grand and imposing like the courtrooms she'd seen in movies: soaring ceilings, rows of polished wood benches, an atmosphere of solemnity and justice. Instead, courtroom 7B was functional and austere, with low ceilings, fluorescent lighting, and an almost bureaucratic coldness. The judge's bench was elevated, true, but only by a few feet, just enough to make Judge Harold physically superior to everyone else in the room. He sat with his hands folded, his face a mask of judicial indifference. Behind him, the Oregon state seal hung on the wall, a reminder that this wasn't just personal drama. This was the machinery of the state deciding Sarah's fate. Sarah took her seat at the table beside Johnson. Directly across from her sat Richard and David. David wouldn't make eye contact with Sarah, and she understood why. It was easier to dismantle someone's life when you didn't have to look them in the eye. By contrast, glanced at Sarah with the calculated warmth of a predator, as if to say, "I know what you are, and I'm going to destroy you professionally." He was a thin man in his late 50s, with silver hair styled perfectly, and a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. His briefcase was leather, Italian, expensive. Everything about him screamed competence and resources. Judge called the court to order and rose for his opening statement. Sarah watched as he moved to center stage, because that's what this was for him, a performance, an opportunity to display his talents. His voice was smooth, practiced, carrying the cadence of someone who delivered thousands of opening statements. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about what is best for the minor child, Tommy. While we respect Ms. Martinez's emotional investment in the boy, we must set aside sentiment and focus on the cold, hard reality. A child's welfare is best served by stability, resources, and demonstrated capability. He paused, letting that sink in. Sarah's chest tightened. My client David is the uncle of this child. He is a successful businessman, a man of means, a man with the resources to provide Tommy with every advantage in life. Ms. Martinez, while well-intentioned, is a single woman working in veterinary services, a field that, while noble, offers limited earning potential. She lives in a modest apartment in southeast Portland. She struggles financially, as her own tax returns demonstrate. Turned slightly, gesturing towards Sarah with theatrical precision. Ms. Martinez loves this child, no one disputes that. But love, Your Honor, is not enough. Children need more than love. They need security, education, opportunity, and a path to success. They need the kind of resources that only financial stability can provide. He walked back to his table and presented a series of documents, meticulously organized, color-coded, professional. We have documentation of Ms. Martinez's financial instability. We have evidence of neighborhoods with higher crime rates where she has chosen to raise the child. We have testimony regarding her lifestyle and her fitness as a guardian. Sarah felt tense beside her. The documents were a blur, but she understood the narrative was constructing. Sarah was inadequate, not because she was cruel or neglectful, but because she was poor. There was something particularly insidious about this argument because it was technically legal, technically acceptable in a court of law. The system wasn't supposed to discriminate based on wealth, yet here it was, doing precisely that. Continued, David, by contrast, has provided a detailed plan for Tommy's education and upbringing. He has the resources to ensure Tommy attends Portland's finest private schools. He has connections in the business community that will facilitate the boy's future success. He has a stable home environment, a professional household staff, and the time and resources to give Tommy the childhood he deserves. He painted a picture of two competing visions: Sarah's vision of struggle and limitation versus David's vision of privilege and opportunity. On paper, on the surface level that courts often operated at, David's vision looked better. Then played his trump card. Additionally, Your Honor, we have concerns about Ms. Martinez's emotional stability and her judgment. We have statements from neighbors describing instances of her working excessively long hours, leaving the child in the care of others. We have documentation of at least 3 instances where she took sick leave from her employment, suggesting potential mental health issues or unreliability. This was a lie wrapped in technical facts. Sarah worked overtime because she had to survive. She'd taken sick leave to attend custody hearings and because she'd come down with the flu, but had twisted these mundane realities into something sinister, something suggesting instability and poor judgment. Judge made notes. His expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. He didn't look skeptical of his claims. If anything, he seemed to be buying them, treating them as reasonable concerns rather than distortions. When it came time for David to testify, he was brilliant. He spoke about missing his sister. His voice wavered with emotion as he described their childhood together, their bond, and his commitment to honoring her memory by ensuring Tommy had every advantage. He spoke about his mansion in the West Hills, his successful restaurants, his vision for Tommy's future. I don't want to take Tommy away from Sarah, David said, tears glistening in his eyes, tears that Sarah suspected were genuine. I genuinely respect what she's done, but I can offer Tommy things that she simply cannot. I can give him a better life. That's not an insult to Sarah, it's just reality. I have resources she doesn't have." He looked directly at Judge. "Your Honor, I'm not trying to hurt anyone here. I'm trying to do what's best for my nephew. I love this boy. And if you truly care about his welfare, you'll recognize that my resources and my stability make me the better choice." It was devastatingly effective. The courtroom was quiet. Even Judge leaned back in his chair, seemingly satisfied by David's testimony. Whispered to Sarah, "He's convincing. I have to admit, he's very convincing." Then came the witness testimony that had prepared. A neighbor was called, a woman named who lived 2 doors down from Sarah's apartment. Had been paid, Sarah suspected, though maintained her testimony was purely voluntary. Spoke about noise from Sarah's apartment late at night. She mentioned seeing Sarah with Tommy looking stressed and disheveled. She suggested that Sarah was overwhelmed by the responsibility of single parenthood. "The boy seems like a sweet kid, but I've seen Sarah yelling at him in the hallway. Once I heard her tell Tommy he needed to be quiet because she had a headache. That's not good parenting. That's a woman stretched too thin." Sarah felt tears building behind her eyes. That one incident described, when Sarah had asked Tommy to lower his voice because of a migraine, was being characterized as abuse or negligence. The courtroom seemed to be constructing a narrative where Sarah was not just inadequate, but actively harmful. As the morning progressed, systematically dismantled Sarah's life and character. He called a financial expert who about the reality of Sarah's income and expenses, suggesting that her apartment barely met basic standards for raising a child. He presented statistics about the correlation between financial instability and childhood outcomes. He crafted a legal framework in which poverty equaled inadequacy and resources equaled fitness. By the time rested his case, Sarah felt as though she'd been flayed alive, squeezed her hand. "Your turn," he whispered. "We get to present our case now." But as Sarah prepared to stand and tell her story, she noticed something that hollowed out her hope. Judge glanced at his watch. He looked bored. He looked like he'd already made up his mind. And his mind seemed to favor the man with the mansion, the resources, and the expensive lawyer. The hammer was falling, and Sarah was directly in its path. Sarah took the witness stand with legs that felt like they might give out beneath her. The Bible she placed her hand on was worn smooth by thousands of other people swearing to tell the truth, and she wondered how many of those people had felt as hopeless as she did right now. The courtroom seemed to press in from all sides, the fluorescent lights too bright, the air too stale. Judge's elevated bench a constant reminder of the hierarchy, the imbalance. She'd been watching dismantle her life for the past 3 hours, and now it was her turn to fight back. The problem was, she didn't know how to fight with his weapons. She had no expensive documents, no meticulously prepared narratives, no slick presentation designed to manipulate emotions while maintaining a veneer of professionalism. Had coached her before the trial. Be honest, be direct, let your genuine love for Tommy come through. It was good advice, but Sarah understood its limitations in this courtroom. Honesty didn't have footnotes and references. Love didn't translate into the language the law spoke. Began his questioning gently. "Sarah, tell the court about your relationship with Tommy." Sarah took a breath, and suddenly she was no longer in this sterile courtroom. She was back in her apartment 3 years ago, holding an 18-month-old boy who had just lost his mother. She could smell Tommy's baby shampoo, feel the weight of him in her arms as he sobbed, not understanding that his mother was gone forever. She could see his confused face as she explained that Mommy had gone to heaven, watching his little brain try to process an impossible concept. "Tommy is everything to me," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "When my sister died, he was lost. He'd wake up screaming in the night looking for. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't let anyone touch him except me. I spent months just sitting with him, helping him understand that the world was still safe, that there were people who loved him." She paused, looking directly at Judge. I didn't take custody of Tommy because I wanted a child. I took custody of Tommy because he needed me, and because I promised my sister I would take care of him. I promised her on her deathbed that I would raise him as if he were my own son. That's not just words, that's the foundation of everything I do. Continued, let's talk about your financial situation. Had painted Sarah as barely surviving, as someone financially unstable, but helped her reframe the narrative. I work at a veterinary clinic, Sarah explained. I earn enough to provide for Tommy's needs. We live in a safe apartment in a good neighborhood. Tommy attends a public school where he's doing well academically. I provide him with health care, nutritious food, clothing, and most importantly, presents. I'm at his school events. I help him with homework. I'm there when he's sick, when he's scared, when he needs someone. She looked at her hands. Yes, we're not wealthy. We don't have a mansion, but Tommy has never gone hungry. He's never lacked medical care. We have a home, we have stability, we have love. I don't understand how that's not enough. Rose for cross-examination, and Sarah braced herself. She knew what was coming. He was going to attack, to find contradictions, to make her doubt herself. Ms. Martinez, he began, his voice smooth as oil. You claim to provide stability, yet you work long hours, correct? I work as much as necessary to support Tommy, Sarah replied carefully. And when you're working, who cares for Tommy? My mother sometimes. Sometimes I arrange with trusted friends, and occasionally his school has aftercare programs. So he's not with you, Prest. He's with strangers. They're not strangers, they're people I trust. But they're not his mother, interrupted. And you, Ms. Martinez, admit to working long hours, leaving him in the care of others. That doesn't sound particularly stable to me. Sarah felt the trap closing. Any answer she gave would somehow be used against her. If she said Tommy was with trusted caregivers, characterized them as strangers. If she said she worked because she needed to provide, he framed that as abandonment. The system was rigged. Then stood, one question during redirect, Your Honor. Judge nodded, looking at his watch. Turned to Sarah. Sarah, I want to ask you something. Is there anything about your life, anything at all, that you haven't told this court about yourself? Something that might be relevant to showing who you truly are as a person? Sarah sat in silence for a moment. She'd been hesitant to mention her volunteer work because it seemed irrelevant to the proceedings. She'd never talked about it much. It was personal, sacred, something she did because it needed to be done, not for recognition or to build her case. But in that moment, watching Judge's indifference, feeling the weight of legal maneuvering, she realized that her silence was a choice she could no longer afford to make. Yes, Sarah said quietly, there is something. The courtroom seemed to shift slightly, attention refocusing. For the past 18 months, I've been volunteering with the Portland Police Department's K-9 unit, Sarah began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. I work with Officer. We train and rehabilitate dogs that have been abused, neglected, or traumatized. Many of these dogs come to us damaged. They've been beaten, starved, tortured. Some have been used in fighting rings. When they arrive, they're aggressive, fearful, unpredictable. She paused, seeing that even Judge was now looking at her instead of his watch. I spend time with these dogs every single day after work, sometimes for hours. I teach them that the world can be safe again. I teach them that humans can be trusted. I teach them that love is real. I never force anything. I just show up, consistently, patiently, day after day, proving through my actions that transformation is possible. Sarah's voice filled with conviction. I believe that Tommy is safer with me than with David, not because I'm wealthy, but because I've dedicated myself to understanding how traumatized beings heal. I understand patience. I understand consistency. I understand unconditional care. I've proven that I can earn the trust of even the most damaged among us. The courtroom had gone completely silent, even seemed momentarily at a loss. These dogs started out unable to trust anyone. Now, they're becoming police dogs, helping to keep our community safe. If I can transform an animal that wanted to bite anyone who approached it into a disciplined, trustworthy partner for law enforcement, I think I've demonstrated something fundamental about my character as a caregiver. Sarah looked directly at Judge. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying my apartment is as nice as David's mansion, but I am saying that I have proven, through consistent action over 18 months, that I have the capacity to provide unconditional love, patience, and transformation to beings that everyone else has given up on. Tommy hasn't been given up on, he's been chosen. He's been loved. He's been shown that the world is safe because I've made it safe for him. Judge's pen, which had been moving constantly during his testimony, had stopped. His eyes were on Sarah, and for the first time his expression showed something other than judicial indifference. There was a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or reconsideration. Sat down and squeezed Sarah's arm. As she stepped down from the witness stand, she felt something shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. She'd revealed something true about herself, something that couldn't be twisted or reframed, something that spoke to who she actually was beneath all the financial metrics and legal arguments. But she didn't know if it would be enough. The courtroom descended into a peculiar silence after Sarah's testimony concluded. Judge remained motionless on his elevated bench, his eyes distant, processing something that had visibly disrupted his predetermined narrative. And David conferred quietly, their body language suggesting uncertainty, a sensation neither of them was accustomed to experiencing. Johnson sat beside Sarah, and she could feel the shift in his energy. Something had changed. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen, but at least the momentum had broken. Judge called for a 15-minute recess, and as the courtroom emptied, Sarah found herself mobbed by supportive glances. A woman in the gallery, a stranger, touched her shoulder as she passed, whispering, "What you do with those dogs is beautiful. Don't let them make you doubt it." It was a small gesture, but it steadied Sarah in a way nothing else had that day. In the hallway, pulled her aside. His face was serious, thoughtful, his mind clearly racing through legal strategies and possibilities. "Sarah, what you said about the dogs, that was powerful, but it might not be enough in a traditional courtroom setting. Judges operate in the realm of documentation and precedent. Your volunteer work is admirable, but it's not quantifiable in legal terms." Sarah's heart sank. She understood what he was saying. Her truth wasn't loud enough for this system. Continued, packing as he spoke, "I'm thinking about something unconventional, something that might violate courtroom protocol but could potentially break through's judicial reserve. What if we could show him, rather than tell him? What if you could demonstrate your work with the dogs in a concrete way?" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her already understood where he was going. "I mean, what if we brought one of the dogs into the courtroom? Not theoretically, actually, physically present. Let the judge see your relationship with the animal in real time. Let him understand through observation what your testimony could never fully convey." Sarah's immediate reaction was skepticism. "That's never going to happen. Courts don't allow animals. They're not courtrooms for animals, they're serious legal spaces." "I know," said, and she could see the determination in his eyes. "But I'm not talking about asking permission. I'm talking about making a motion, a formal request to the judge. I'm going to argue that in cases involving character, actions often speak louder than words. I'm going to argue that your relationship with a traumatized animal you've rehabilitated is direct, observable evidence of your capacity for unconditional care and transformation." He stopped packing and looked at Sarah directly. "It's risky. If the judge denies it, we'll have wasted time and energy on something he might see as grandstanding. But Sarah, honestly, where we stand right now isn't good. It's already leaning toward David. We need something that breaks through his judicial reserve, something that forces him to actually feel something instead of just processing facts." Sarah considered this. It was audacious, possibly foolish, the kind of move that could either save her case or destroy it entirely. But as she thought about Tommy, about the possibility of losing him, about the coldness of a legal system that measured love in square footage and salary, she realized she had nothing left to lose. "Which dog?" she asked. Smiled slightly. "You tell me which one." The answer came immediately to Sarah's mind: Rex. After the recess ended, the courtroom reconvened. Expected to continue his attack, perhaps to call more witnesses designed to solidify the narrative of Sarah's inadequacy, but rose with a different purpose. "Your Honor, the defense wishes to make an unusual motion." Judge looked up from his papers, his expression registering mild annoyance at the interruption of his expected procedural flow. "A motion? Counsel, we're in the midst of direct examination. This is hardly the time." "Your Honor," interrupted respectfully but firmly, "this motion is directly relevant to the question of Ms. Martinez's character and capacity for caregiving. I would like to request that the court allow Ms. Martinez to demonstrate her expertise and relationship with one of the police dogs she has trained, not through testimony or documentation, but through direct, observable interaction." The courtroom seemed to pause, processing the audacity of what had just been suggested. Judge's jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of genuine emotion Sarah had seen from him. "Counsel, this is a courthouse, not a circus." "I understand," Your Honor said, and his voice carried a quiet conviction. "But in matters of character, actions often speak louder than words. Ms. Martinez's testimony regarding her work with traumatized animals is abstract, open to interpretation. But if this court could observe her actual relationship with an animal she has rehabilitated, it would provide concrete, undeniable evidence of her capacity for patience, consistency, and unconditional care, qualities directly relevant to her fitness as a guardian." He paused, allowing that to sink in. "Furthermore, Your Honor, there is legal precedent for allowing non-traditional evidence when character is directly at issue. In 3 separate Oregon appellate cases, courts have allowed demonstrative evidence that goes beyond typical courtroom procedures when character determinations are critical to the outcome." Judge's expression hardened. "This is highly irregular, counsel." "It is," acknowledged. "But the question before this court is equally unusual. We're not just determining custody based on financial resources. We're determining what best interests of the child means. Does it mean material advantages? Or does it mean emotional security, demonstrated capacity for love, and proven ability to heal and transform? Those are profound questions, Your Honor, and they deserve examination beyond the traditional documentary evidence." Stood, sensing an opportunity. "Your Honor, I must object to this theatricality. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation that clouds judicial reasoning. The defense is asking you to participate in a circus act rather than apply the law fairly and impartially." But pressed forward. "Your Honor, it's not theatricality if it's true. And what could be more true than direct observation of Ms. Martinez's relationship with an animal she has rehabilitated? The prosecution has presented documents. The defense has presented testimony. But I'm asking for something more fundamental, the opportunity for Your Honor to witness firsthand what Ms. Martinez is truly capable of." Judge sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The courtroom was completely silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and thunderous in her ears. She understood that this moment would determine everything. If Judge said no, she would lose her case. If he said yes, she had one chance to show him, without words or legal arguments, exactly who she was. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Judge spoke. "This is highly irregular. I want to be clear about that." His voice was measured, judicial, maintaining his authority. "However, counsel makes a point regarding character evidence. In matters of child custody, character is indeed central to determining the best interests of the child." He paused, and Sarah held her breath. "I will allow this demonstration. However, counsel, I am skeptical of its value, and I am conscious of the time this court has spent on this matter. You will have 15 minutes. The animal will be brought in by a qualified handler, and there will be no surprises, no dramatic gestures. This is a court of law, and it will remain dignified." "Thank you, Your Honor," said, relief evident in his voice. As the courtroom broke for the animal to be brought in, Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. She had one chance. 15 minutes to show Judge something that no legal argument could convey. 15 minutes to demonstrate that transformation was possible, that love could heal damage, that consistency and patience were forms of strength that transcended financial resources. She thought about Rex, the traumatized, aggressive dog that had arrived at the facility 18 months ago, barely able to trust anyone. She thought about the hundreds of hours she'd spent with him, teaching him through consistent, patient action that the world could be safe. She thought about Tommy, waiting at home with her mother, unaware that his entire future was about to be decided in a courtroom, with an unusual demonstration involving a police dog. Placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, Sarah, you've already shown who you are. Now you just have to let the judge see it." Sarah nodded, closed her eyes, and prepared for the most important 15 minutes of her life. The 15-minute recess before Rex's entrance felt like hours. Sarah sat alone in a small consultation room adjacent to the courtroom, her hands shaking slightly. She tried to steady herself by thinking about Rex, about all the work they'd done together, about the transformation she'd witnessed in that magnificent animal. But her mind kept spiraling into worst-case scenarios. What if Rex had a bad day? What if he was nervous in an unfamiliar environment? What if Judge interpreted any uncertainty or hesitation as proof of Sarah's inability to control the animal? What if she failed? Entered the room with a calm that Sarah, "Officer is here with Rex. They're in the parking area. The bailiff will bring them in through the side entrance in about 5 minutes. Sarah, I need you to remember something. You're not performing. You're not trying to impress the judge. You're just being yourself with Rex the way you've been with him every single day for 18 months. Just be honest. Just be present." Sarah nodded, though her stomach felt like it was doing somersaults. She'd worked with Rex through rain, through her own exhaustion, through moments when she'd questioned whether she was making any difference at all. But she'd never had to perform this work for a judge. She'd never had to worry that one bad moment would determine her son's future. There was a knock on the door. "It's time," the bailiff said. Sarah followed back into the courtroom. The gallery had filled with people. Word had spread through the courthouse that something unusual was happening. People were curious, drawn by the unusual nature of the motion. Sarah recognized several courthouse regulars, lawyers who had heard rumors about what was about to unfold. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation. Judge sat with his arms crossed, his expression suggesting he was already regretting his decision to allow this demonstration. The record should reflect that we are now reconvening in the matter of custody proceedings. Counsel has requested an unusual demonstrative evidence procedure. I am allowing this, but I want to be absolutely clear. This courtroom will maintain its dignity and decorum. If this becomes a circus, I will terminate it immediately. The side door opened. An officer entered, leading Rex on a professional leash. The courtroom gasped. Rex was a magnificent German shepherd, approximately 85 pounds of muscle and fur, with the distinctive coloring of his breed, tan and black markings that seemed almost elegant in their precision. His ears were alert, his eyes intelligent and watchful. He moved with a controlled grace that spoke of training and discipline. To anyone unfamiliar with his history, he would appear to be simply a well-trained police dog, perhaps intimidating but certainly professional and composed. What they didn't see was the trauma embedded in his nervous system, the violent past that had nearly destroyed him, the months of terror and abuse that had shaped his early life. Officer was a woman in her early 50s, with gray streaking her dark hair and the calm, assured demeanor of someone who had worked with animals for decades. She'd taken on Rex as her partner after Sarah's rehabilitation work, and the bond between them was visible in the way Rex responded to her. the slight relaxation in his posture that indicated trust and security. The record will reflect that officer of the Portland Police Department's K-9 unit is entering the courtroom with Rex, a police dog currently in active service, stated for the court record. Officer will serve as the handler for this demonstration to ensure the safety of the courtroom and to maintain appropriate protocols. Judge nodded stiffly. Proceed. Officer led Rex to the center of the courtroom, directly in front of the judge's bench. The bailiff had cleared a space, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. People leaned forward in their seats. Even and David seemed absorbed in what was about to unfold. Everyone understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Sarah stood at instruction. The moment she rose, Rex's head snapped in her direction. His entire body language transformed in an instant, ears perking up further, body straightening, tail moving with a subtle motion that indicated recognition and pleasure. The dog knew her. More than that, the dog's entire being seemed to orient itself toward her. Rex, Sarah said softly, come. Officer gave the leash minimal slack, allowing the dog to move toward Sarah. As Rex approached, his body language continued to shift. His demeanor, which had been professional and composed, became something more. It became affectionate, trusting, almost reverent. He pressed his massive head against Sarah's leg, and she could see the emotion ripple across her body as she placed her hand on his head. Good boy, she whispered. Good boy, Rex, you remember me. The courtroom was completely silent. No one moved. Even Judge's judicial composure seemed to waver slightly as he watched this interaction. There was something profound happening, something that transcended the artificial boundaries of the legal system. Sarah began to speak to Rex, and her voice carried through the courtroom with a tenderness that made several people in the gallery shift with emotion. Rex, do you remember when you first came to us? You were so scared. You didn't trust anyone. You thought the world was a dangerous place, and maybe it was for you. But we worked together, didn't we? Every single day. I showed you that there were people who loved you. I showed you that consistency means safety. I showed you that patience is a form of strength. She stroked his head, and Rex's eyes closed slightly, basking in the affection. You learned to trust again, Rex. A traumatized being learned to trust because someone showed up, day after day, proving through their actions that transformation was possible. That love was real. Sarah looked directly at Judge. This is what I do, Your Honor. I take beings that are damaged and frightened, and I help them learn that the world can be safe again. That love is real. That transformation is possible. Then Sarah did something that made the courtroom intake a collective breath. She raised her arm and pointed directly at Judge. Rex, she said, look at the judge. The dog turned his head in the direction Sarah was pointing, his eyes focusing on Judge without any aggression or hostility. It was a simple gesture, a demonstration of training and control, but it contained layers of meaning. Here was an animal that had been so traumatized it had wanted to attack people on sight, now responding to a woman's direction with calm obedience. Here was proof, undeniable and observable, of what Sarah was capable of. Judge's eyes widened. His jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting on his desk, suddenly became rigid. For a moment, the judge seemed to forget he was in a courtroom, that he was a judicial officer maintaining appropriate decorum. For a moment, he seemed to be witnessing something that transcended the legal framework, a human being demonstrating, through pure action, what she was fundamentally capable of. Sarah knelt beside Rex and wrapped her arms around his neck. The dog allowed this with complete trust, his body relaxing into her embrace. Thank you, boy, she whispered. Thank you for showing the court what we've been able to do together. Officer stood silently, tears visible in her own eyes. She'd witnessed Sarah's work with Rex over 18 months, and she understood the significance of this moment. She understood what Sarah had accomplished. Judge remained motionless. His expression had become unreadable, but something fundamental had shifted in his face, in his posture, in the way he was regarding Sarah. For perhaps the first time in this entire proceeding, the judge seemed to be truly seeing her, not as a statistic or a case file, but as a human being capable of extraordinary love and transformation. Sarah stood, still maintaining contact with Rex's head. The demonstration had lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though it felt like much longer. The courtroom remained silent, as if everyone understood that something significant had just occurred, something that couldn't be undone, something that had changed the calculus of this case in ways that documents and testimony never could. Judge's hand moved to his mouth. His fingers trembled slightly. Judge Harold did not move. His hands remained frozen in front of his face, his fingers trembling with a subtle motion that everyone in the courtroom could perceive. His eyes, which had maintained a judicial coldness throughout the entire proceedings, had transformed into something else entirely, something that suggested an internal earthquake was occurring beneath his carefully maintained judicial exterior. For a full 30 seconds, perhaps longer, the judge sat in absolute stillness, his gaze fixed on Sarah and Rex. The courtroom had entered a realm beyond language. Reporters who attended dozens of custody hearings would later struggle to describe what they'd witnessed. It wasn't dramatic in the conventional sense. There were no tears from Sarah, no theatrical displays. She simply stood beside a dog she'd rehabilitated, her hand resting gently on his head, radiating a quiet conviction about her own capacity for love and transformation. But that simplicity, that authenticity, seemed to penetrate something in Judge that Olive's arguments and David's testimony had failed to touch. Officer remained perfectly still, understanding the significance of the moment. She'd brought hundreds of police dogs into courtrooms over her career, but never had she witnessed a judge respond with such visible emotional impact to a demonstration. She could see the judicial armor cracking, the man beneath the robes finally being forced to confront something his legal training had taught him to dismiss. The power of genuine character expressed through consistent action. Sarah, still with her hand on Rex's head, made a subtle motion. She turned to look directly at Judge, and her eyes met his. In that moment of connection, something passed between them, a recognition that transcended courtroom procedure. Sarah wasn't asking the judge to make an exception for her. She wasn't begging for mercy or special consideration. She was simply showing him who she was and implicitly asking, doesn't this matter? Doesn't genuine transformation matter? Doesn't demonstrated love matter more than financial resources? Rex sensed the emotional intensity in the room. The dog, despite his training and discipline, seemed to understand that this moment was different, significant. He pressed more firmly against Sarah's leg, his body language expressing a trust so complete and absolute that it seemed impossible anyone could witness it and maintain their previous assumptions about her fitness as a guardian. Shifted uncomfortably in his chair. David had gone completely pale. Both men understood, with the clarity of people accustomed to winning, that something fundamental had changed. The legal landscape they'd been so confidently navigating had just shifted beneath their feet. All their carefully prepared arguments about financial stability, about resources and opportunity, suddenly seemed hollow and irrelevant compared to what the courtroom had just witnessed. Judge slowly lowered his hands. His jaw worked slightly, as if he were trying to formulate words but couldn't quite manage them. His eyes remained on Sarah, and she could see the struggle happening in his face, the internal conflict between his judicial training, his previous biases, his predilections toward legal formalism, and what his human heart was now unmistakably telling him. "Officer," Judge said finally, his voice different from before, quieter, less certain, carrying an undertone of emotion he seemed to be struggling to contain, "please return Rex to the hallway. Ms. Martinez may remain." Officer nodded with understanding. She gently guided Rex back toward the side door, and the dog followed without resistance, though his eyes remained on Sarah until he disappeared through the doorway. The moment the dog left, something shifted in the courtroom. The focal point that had held everyone's attention was gone, but its impact remained, lingering like incense in the air. Judge stood up from his bench, an unusual gesture breaking another courtroom protocol. He descended the steps to his elevated position and approached Sarah directly. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. This was unprecedented. In 20 years as a judge, had maintained strict boundaries of decorum. He never descended from his bench during proceedings. He never engaged informally with parties to a case. Yet here he was, stepping down, approaching Sarah with an expression that seemed to contain genuine conflict. "Ms. Martinez," Judge said, and his voice carried a tremor that he couldn't quite suppress, "I owe you an apology." Sarah's eyes widened. An apology from a judge during active proceedings was extraordinary. "I entered this case with predetermined assumptions," the judge continued, his words deliberate and carefully chosen. "I allowed myself to be influenced by external factors, by documentation, by counsel's arguments, by the superficial metrics we use to evaluate human worth. I nearly made a grave error." He paused, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. "What I just witnessed was something that cannot be disputed or reframed or presented in a misleading context. I watched a traumatized animal respond to you with absolute trust. I watched you communicate with that dog without words, through pure consistency and demonstrated care. That tells me something fundamental about your character." Judge's voice grew stronger, though still carrying emotional weight. "I have spent 20 years on this bench trying to make objective decisions based on law and precedent. But I was about to make a subjective decision based on my own biases, my tendency to equate wealth with stability, resources with love, financial advantage with fitness for parenthood. You forced me to see beyond those assumptions." He turned and walked back to his bench, resuming his seat with deliberate slowness. The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. "This court is going to take a recess," Judge announced. "I need time to review the case materials with fresh perspective. I need time to think about what I just witnessed and what it means for this child's welfare. Court will reconvene in 1 hour." He gavelled once sharply and rose from his bench. As bailiffs ushered people out of the courtroom, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by a rush of emotions too complex to name. Relief, hope, exhaustion, and a strange sense of vindication all mixed together. Was beside her, squeezing her shoulder. "That was extraordinary," whispered. "In all my years practicing law, I've never seen a judge respond like that. He's reconsidering everything." But Sarah's mind wasn't entirely on the legal victory. She was thinking about Rex, about the moment when the dog had recognized her, and his entire being had shifted toward her. She was thinking about Tommy, about how that moment of trust between woman and dog might have just changed her son's entire future. She was thinking about the profound truth that had been demonstrated in that courtroom. Transformation is real, love is observable, and consistency is a form of power that no amount of money could purchase. In the hallway, Officer had Rex calmed and composed, though the dog still kept glancing back toward the courtroom, as if searching for Sarah. "What happened in there?" Officer asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "He saw," Sarah said simply. "Judge finally saw who I really am. He saw what Rex and I have built together. He saw that transformation is possible." Officer smiled, tears in her eyes. "And now he has to decide what that means for Tommy." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of the moment they'd just survived. 1 hour. That's all they had to wait. 1 hour and her entire future would be determined, not by legal arguments or financial comparisons, but by what a judge had finally been forced to witness, the undeniable power of genuine love and transformation. She sat on a bench in the hallway, closed her eyes, and began to pray, not for victory, but for clarity, for the judge to maintain the insight he just experienced, for the legal system to finally recognize that some things matter more than resources and documentation. In 1 hour, everything would change. The hour of recess felt like a suspended animation, a moment outside of time where normal causality seemed to have paused. Sarah sat in the courthouse cafeteria with, though neither of them could eat. Coffee cups sat cooling in front of them, untouched. Around them, the ordinary business of the courthouse continued. Attorneys consulting with clients, people shuffling through paperwork, the ambient noise of the legal machine grinding on. But for Sarah, everything had become unreal, dreamlike. She kept replaying the moment when Judge had descended from his bench, the tremor in his voice, the apology that should never have been necessary but somehow felt like the most important thing anyone had ever said to her. "He's going to rule in your favor," said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Sarah. I've never seen a judge respond like that to any demonstration, any evidence. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a legal moment, it was a human moment. And it changed him." Sarah wanted to believe this, but part of her remained guarded. The legal system had taught her to be cautious about hope. But what if he reconsiders? What if, during that hour, he starts thinking about precedent, about financial stability, about all the traditional metrics he was using before? "He won't," said with conviction, "because what he witnessed is more powerful than any legal argument or precedent. He watched a traumatized animal, an animal that by all accounts should be aggressive and uncontrollable, respond to you with complete trust. He watched you demonstrate something that cannot be taught in law school or learned through legal precedent. You demonstrated the capacity to transform damaged beings through nothing but consistent love and presence." Officer entered the cafeteria and joined them, carrying her own coffee. "Rex is fine. He's in the patrol car outside. He keeps looking for you, Sarah. I think he knows something significant happened." Sarah smiled despite her anxiety. Animals know. They're more perceptive than we give them credit for. Officer leaned forward. "I want you to know something. In all my years working with dogs, I've never seen one rehabilitate as completely as Rex did under your care. That dog arrived at the facility broken in ways that most people couldn't understand. He'd been tortured, starved, used for fighting. His trust in humans had been shattered so completely that we initially thought he might not be salvageable, but you proved that transformation was possible." She paused, sipping her coffee. "When I watched you with him in that courtroom, I realized something. You don't just rehabilitate dogs, Sarah. You rehabilitate their sense of what's possible. You show them that the world can be different than it was. That's exactly what a good parent does for a child. That judge understood that, even if he didn't have the words to express it." The time until the reconvening of court seemed to stretch endlessly. Sarah found herself thinking about Tommy, about what he was doing right now with her mother. She'd called during the recess to check on him, and her mother had reported that he was fine, playing with Lego blocks, unaware that his entire future was being decided in a courtroom across the city. Sarah had almost told her mother what had happened, but she'd held back, afraid of jinxing it, afraid that speaking the hope aloud would somehow make it less real. At 2:47 p.m., 15 minutes before the court was scheduled to reconvene, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. Her hand trembled as she read it. "I'm dropping my custody petition. My lawyer is informing the court now. I'm sorry, Sarah. What I saw today made me realize I was wrong about what Tommy needs." Sarah stared at the message, reading it multiple times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. Read it over her shoulder and his eyes widened. "He's withdrawing," breathed. "Before the judge even rules, he's withdrawing his petition. Sarah, do you understand what this means? You've won." Sarah felt her legs become weak. She had to sit down. She'd been preparing herself for a victory, but the actual moment of triumph felt different than she'd imagined. There was no ecstasy, no explosion of joy. Instead, there was a profound sense of relief so complete that it nearly knocked her off her feet. She'd been holding her breath for so long that she'd forgotten what normal breathing felt like. Officer hugged her. "You did it. You're bringing Tommy home. You're keeping your family intact." But as they made their way back to the courtroom, Sarah found herself thinking about Judge, about that frozen moment when he'd truly seen her for the first time. She understood that his transformation was perhaps more significant than the outcome of the case. In a system designed to process people like objects, he'd been forced to see her as a complete human being. He'd been forced to confront his own biases and acknowledge them. That took courage. When they entered the courtroom, Sarah could feel the energy had shifted completely. Looked deflated, defeated, going through the motions of informing the court of his client's withdrawal. David sat with his head down, seemingly genuinely conflicted about his decision. Judge entered with a demeanor that was noticeably different from before, softer, more thoughtful, carrying an air of someone who had engaged in genuine self-reflection. The court has been informed that the petitioner, Mr. David, is withdrawing his custody petition, Judge announced. However, I want to proceed with my ruling anyway, as this case raises significant questions about how we determine best interests of the child in custody matters. He arranged his papers with deliberate care, and when he finally began to speak, his voice carried a gravity that seemed to fill the entire courtroom. This case began with a traditional framework for evaluating custody, financial resources, educational opportunities, material advantages. Under that framework, Mr. appeared to be the better choice. However, this morning, I was presented with evidence that forced me to reconsider what truly constitutes the best interests of a child. Judge paused, making eye contact with Sarah directly. I witnessed Ms. Martinez demonstrate something that cannot be or documented, the capacity to transform a traumatized being through consistent love and presence. I witnessed an animal that should theoretically be aggressive and uncontrollable respond to her with absolute trust and confidence. He leaned forward slightly. I have been on this bench for 20 years, and in all that time, I have often confused objective metrics with genuine truth. Today, I was reminded that some truths are observable but not quantifiable. Some things matter more than resources and documentation. His tone became more formal, transitioning into the legal framework. For these reasons, and for the reasons stated in the comprehensive written opinion I am now entering into the record, this court awards primary custody of Tommy to Sarah Martinez. The petitioner's visitation rights are established as follows. But Sarah heard the rest as if from a distance. The words blurred together. She'd won. Tommy was hers. The life she'd fought so desperately to maintain was confirmed, protected, validated by the legal system. More significantly, she understood something that the judge had finally articulated. Genuine transformation matters more than material advantage. Love matters more than resources. Consistency matters more than wealth. And sometimes, a dog's recognition of another being's worth is more powerful than any legal argument. In that moment, as Judge continued reading his ruling, Sarah felt the weight of the past 3 years lift from her shoulders. The desperate fight, the fear, the uncertainty, it was all transforming into something different now. It was becoming a story, a moment in time that had tested her and ultimately affirmed something fundamental about who she was. The courthouse steps were flooded with golden afternoon light as Sarah emerged into the February air. She stood for a moment, allowing the sunlight to wash over her, feeling its warmth like a benediction. 3 years of holding her breath seemed to release all at once. Behind her was already fielding questions from reporters who had gathered to cover the unusual custody case. The story of the judge and the police dog had captured something in the public imagination, a reminder that the legal system, despite its imperfections, could still be touched by truth. Officer waited at the bottom of the steps with Rex, and the dog's reaction upon seeing Sarah was immediate and joyful. He pulled slightly against the leash, and Officer released him with a knowing smile. Rex bounded toward Sarah, his entire massive body expressing an exuberance that only dogs could achieve. Sarah knelt down and buried her face in his fur, and for a moment the only thing that existed was this: a woman and a dog, bonded by 18 months of consistent love and transformation. "You did it," Officer said, kneeling beside them. "Tommy's yours for real now." Sarah stood, unable to speak because the emotions were too overwhelming, too complex. Relief, vindication, exhaustion, and a strange sense of responsibility all mixed together. She'd won the custody case, but more than that, she'd changed something in the system. She'd changed a judge who represented thousands of other judges, other officials, other people in positions of power who'd learned to conflate wealth with value. Her phone rang. It was her mother. Sarah answered immediately, and before she could say anything, her mother said, "I just got a call from Tommy. Stays with you. He stays with you." "Yes," Sarah said, and the tears finally came. "He stays with me. I'm bringing him home tonight. I'm bringing my son home." That evening, Sarah drove to her mother's house to pick up Tommy. He was playing in the front yard, building something in the dirt with a stick, completely unaware that his entire life had just been legally secured. When he saw Sarah's car, he abandoned his project immediately and ran toward her, his 7-year-old legs pumping with energy. Mom, Grandma said you had something in court. Are you okay?" Sarah picked him up and held him, this child she'd raised, this boy who called her mother, this human being who represented everything she'd been fighting for. "Everything's okay, baby. Everything's perfect now. I'm always going to be your mom. Nobody can ever change that." Tommy didn't fully understand the implications of what had just happened, but he understood that something significant had been confirmed. He hugged her, and Sarah closed her eyes, absorbing this moment into her cells, into her memory, into the foundation of who she was. As they drove home, Tommy talked about his day, about a friend at school who'd gotten in trouble for pushing, about wanting to plant a garden in the backyard. Sarah listened to every word, grateful for the mundane beauty of normal conversation, for the privilege of witnessing the ordinary moments of her son's life. 3 weeks later, Officer called with news that changed Sarah's trajectory entirely. "The department wants to hire you," she said without preamble. "Full-time, as a K-9 rehabilitation specialist. We've received incredible feedback about Rex's transformation, and we want to expand the program. We want to build it around your methodology." Sarah's hands trembled as she listened. "I don't have formal credentials. I don't have a degree in animal behavior or—" "We don't care," Officer interrupted. "You have something better. You have demonstrated expertise. You have a proven track record. You have results. The department is authorized to offer you a position at $52,000 annually with benefits, and you'd be working with abused dogs full-time, training new handlers in your methods." Sarah sat down, overcome. The number seemed almost unreal, nearly double what she'd been making working overtime at the veterinary clinic. But more than the salary, the opportunity meant something profound. Her work with traumatized beings would no longer be a sacrifice squeezed into the margins of her life. It would become her primary work, her calling, her purpose. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "Yes, absolutely yes." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the Portland Police Department's new K-9 Rehabilitation Center, a facility that had been expanded specifically to accommodate the program she'd developed. The center housed 12 dogs in various stages of rehabilitation, each one with their own story of trauma and recovery. Sarah had hired 2 additional staff members and was training them in her methods, not through lectures or credentials, but through the same patient, consistent presence she brought to the dogs themselves. Rex had been promoted to full police dog status and was partnered with Officer, but Sarah maintained her connection with him. He came to the facility several times a week, sometimes to rest, sometimes to help with the training of newer dogs. His presence was calming to the traumatized animals. They could sense his transformation, his journey from broken to healed. The courtroom moment had rippled outward in ways Sarah couldn't have anticipated. Judge had written a comprehensive opinion about his case that had been published in the Oregon Law Review. In it, he discussed how traditional metrics for determining custody, financial resources, documentation, material advantages, often missed something essential: the demonstrated capacity for unconditional love and transformation. The opinion had sparked discussions in legal circles about how to incorporate non-traditional evidence into custody determinations. More remarkably, Judge had established a fund in the Portland Police Department specifically for expanding K-9 rehabilitation programs. He'd written a letter to officer explaining that watching Sarah work with Rex had changed his understanding of justice itself. Justice, he'd written, is not just about applying rules consistently. True justice requires seeing the whole person, understanding their capacity for growth and transformation, and having the courage to base decisions on that understanding rather than on surface metrics. On the one-year anniversary of the courtroom demonstration, Sarah received an invitation to speak at an annual conference for family law attorneys. She hesitated, public speaking terrified her, but encouraged her. "You have something important to say. You have a story that can change how people think about custody, about character, about what matters in determining a child's welfare." Standing before an auditorium of 200 attorneys, Sarah felt nervous, but when she began to speak, her words found their own rhythm. "I was told by the legal system that I was inadequate," she began. "Not because I was cruel or neglectful, but because I was poor, because I didn't have resources, because I couldn't provide material advantages, but the legal system was measuring me against the wrong metrics." She paused, looking out at the faces of the attorneys. "I want to tell you about a dog that had been tortured and abused, a dog that wanted to bite anyone who approached it, a dog that everyone had given up on. I spent 18 months with that dog. 18 months of showing up every single day, of being consistent, of demonstrating through my actions that transformation was possible. That dog learned to trust again. That dog became a police dog. That dog helped me win my custody case, because a judge finally understood that the quality that had rehabilitated that traumatized animal was the same quality I would bring to raising my son." She spoke about the importance of looking beyond documentation and financial records. She spoke about the legal system's blindness to genuine character. She spoke about how true justice required seeing the whole person. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Attorneys approached her afterward, many of them visibly moved, many of them committing to reconsidering how they approached custody cases. At home that evening, Sarah sat with Tommy, now 8 years old and thriving in school. She'd told him about the speech, and he'd asked to hear it. As she recounted her story, Tommy listened with the serious attention he sometimes brought to important matters. "So the judge didn't understand who you were," Tommy said, processing, "until he saw you with the dog." "Yes," Sarah said. "He understood that I could do hard things, that I could transform things that were broken, that I could love something damaged back to health. He understood that those qualities were what made me a good mother." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are a good mother, you're the best mother." Sarah pulled him close, and in that moment everything crystallized. The courtroom, the legal system, the years of struggle, it had all been worth it for this. For the security of knowing that Tommy was hers, that their life together was validated, that her capacity for love had been recognized not just by her, but by a system that had nearly it. That night, as Tommy slept, Sarah walked outside and looked up at the stars. She thought about Rex, about Judge, about the frozen moment when the judge had finally seen her. She thought about all the traumatized beings, human and animal, who were still waiting for someone to believe in their capacity for transformation. The moment when she'd pointed at the police dog and Judge had frozen had become more than just a courtroom incident. It had become a catalyst for change, in the judge's understanding of justice, in the legal system's approach to custody, in Sarah's own life and purpose. It had shown that sometimes, truth speaks loudest not through words but through undeniable action. It had demonstrated that genuine love, consistently expressed, could transform even the most damaged among us. And most importantly, It had taught Sarah that transformation wasn't just something she did for traumatized dogs. It was something that could happen in courtrooms, in legal systems, in the hearts of judges. It could happen anywhere, if someone had the courage to show their authentic self and trust that the truth would be recognized.